Hi everybody, this is Matt Powers. In this video, I'm going to talk about introduction to Spark DataFrames. So this is just going to cover the very basics of Spark DataFrames, how to use them, how to do some basic operations, how to create them, and hopefully Spark newbies find this useful. So a Spark DataFrame is pretty much similar to a table in a relational database. It's also similar to a worksheet in an Excel notebook. So it basically organizes data in a bunch of columns, and there's a bunch of rows. So in this example, we have a data frame with 3 columns: the city, the country, and the population. And then we have 3 rows of data. So we have Boston in the United States with a population of 670,000 people. We have Dubai in the United Arab Emirates with a population of 3.1 million people, and Cordoba in Argentina with a population of 1.39 million people. So let's open up a little community Databricks notebook, create that data frame, and then play around with this data a bit. So I'm going to run that command. So here we can see we're using we have a sequence of tuples, and we're using this toDF method to convert that sequence of tuples into a data frame. This toDF method can be called on sequences, and it takes arguments, which are the column names. So this is a quick and easy way of making a data frame. This toDF method is a Spark implicit, so it's automatically run in the Databricks environment, importing the Spark implicits. But if you run this in a different environment, you might need to explicitly import the Spark implicits in order to be able to access this method. Great. So now let's look at this shell method, which is defined in the DataFrame class. I believe DataFrame is a class. Let's refer to the docs. Let's look at show. So what does show do? It displays the top 20 rows of a dataset in tabular form. Great. That's a great way to see it. So this is the dataset class where that's defined. So this is pretty cool. It's a nice way of seeing the contents of the data frame, but Databricks actually provides an even better way of seeing the contents of a data frame in their environment, which is this display function. So here we can say that this is printed out all pretty and we can sort and stuff. So we'll go with this display function. So we can see we have our 3 columns: city, country, and population, and we still have our 3 rows of data. Fantastic. Let's take a look at this print schema method. So what print schema does is it shows the schema of the data frame. So the schema is what the columns are, what their names are, what type of values can reside in that column, and if null values can be included in that column. So in this case, we have the city column. It's the string type, and the nullable property is set to true. So that means that the city column can contain null values. The country column is also a string type, and the nullable property is set to true. And the population column is a double, so double means like a floating point number. And the nullable property is set to false. So that means that the population column cannot contain null values. Now, we couldn't specify this stuff explicitly when we created the data frame with this toDF method. We'll go over a method later that will kind of let us explicitly create the data frame with all of these flags set how we want. But toDF is just kind of a quick and dirty way of making a data frame to get started. Great. So let's add a column to the data frame. So we're going to do that with this with column method. So again, with column is whenever you see df dot and then a method, that means that this is going to be a method of the dataset class. So we have with column. So what does with column do? It returns a new dataset by adding a column or replacing the existing column that has the same name. Great. So what this is going to do is add a column that's called is big city, and the column value is, in this case, going to be a Boolean value. A Boolean means true or false. So that column is going to be true if the population is greater than 1 million, and it's going to be false if the population is not greater than 1 million. And we can see that we're assigning this to a new data frame. So let's run this. So we need to, one other thing to point. So the reason we're importing this column function is so we can call it here. If we didn't import this function, then that would have raised an error. Cool. So let's take a look at our output of this data frame. So here we have the city, the country, and the population. So these are the same columns we had earlier. And we're adding this fourth column is big city. We can see for Boston it's false because the population is less than 1 million. But for Dubai and Cordoba, it's true because the population is greater than 1 million. Let's see a couple of different ways we can run this. So the first thing we could do is we could get rid of this variable. We could just kind of run display directly like this. And that'll work. That'll get us the same result. Another thing we could do is if we didn't want this column function, we could rely on this kind of trick that Spark has to make a column, which is just that $sign. You need to import the Spark implicits to be able to access the syntax. So just kind of showing everybody different ways so we can get the same results. But at the end of the day, it's the same data frame with 4 columns. Okay, fantastic. So now let's move on to filtering rows. So here we added a column to see if the city is considered big, but let's say we want to just filter out all rows in our data frame that contain a population of less than 1 million. So in this case, we can use the filter method. Let's take a look at filter. Filter. So filters rows using the given condition. All right, that sounds great. Sounds useful. So let's get df.filter. So that's a method defined in the dataset class. And here's the condition that when the population's this is filter when it's greater than 1 million. So in this case, we only want all rows where the population is greater than 1 million. But basically filtering out all rows that have a population less than 1 million. Great. So here we can see that Boston has been filtered out, and we're left with just Dubai and Cordoba in the resulting data frame. Okay, let's dig into this schema a bit more. So we can see df.schema. So schema is going to be defined here as well. Let's see what the schema function does. It returns the schema of this data set. So by schema, it means like what are all the columns, what are their types, and what is their nullable property. So this is in Spark, that schema is persisted in this struct type object. So if we go here and we type in struct type, we can see that this is what kind of persists schemas. And you can read up more on this here. So, wow, I just heard a crazy thunder here. I think we're gonna have a wild rainstorm. All right, so this is kind of hard to read in this syntax. So I pasted it in this little Sublime notebook. So here we have this struct type. It's basically containing a list of struct fields. Each struct field has the column name, the column type, and the Boolean property. So we can see that the city and country are string type columns, and the population is a double type column, which means a floating point number. Great. So let's use kind of everything we've learned thus far to use this create data frame method to create a data frame where we can specifically set our schema how we'd like. So if we're looking at this here, we need to import the Spark SQL types. So that's going to let us access things like struct field and integer type and string type. And we're also going to import this row object. The row object is going to let us create rows of data. So the first thing we're going to do here is create a sequence of rows. So the sequence of rows is just going to contain some data. In this case, we have the average lifespan and animal type. So Here we have the average lifespan is 30, the animal type is bat. Is it possible that a bat has an average lifespan of 30 years? That would seem like a lot, but maybe that's true. I made this a while ago. So now we have the animal schema as well. So the schema is going to be a list of struct fields. So struct fields, you can think of them as a column. So each struct field has a column name, it has the column type, and it has the nullable property. So in this case, we're saying that this average lifespan is an integer type, and it's true, which means that this average lifespan can hypothetically take null values. And the animal type is a string type, and it's also true, which means this animal type column can also take null values. So in order to create this data frame, we're going to use this spark.createDataFrame method. So this createDataFrame method is defined in the Spark session. I believe it's a class, but let's take a look. So we open up Spark session. Spark session is a class, and then we have this createDataFrame method, and this is how we create data frame. The reason you see this so many implementations of this is because it's using a Scala method overloading capability. We'll talk in a future video. I'll talk more about how Spark uses Scala object-oriented stuff. We won't dive into that too much. So this createDataFrame method is taking two arguments. The first is an RDD of our data. I understand this is getting a little complicated, so sorry about that, but this is an RDD of our data. An RDD is this, what is it, resilient distributed data or something like that. I forgot what it stands for, but there's a lot of RDD stuff here. It's a resilient distributed data set. So the first argument is an RDD. We're using this Spark context parallelize method to convert our sequence of rows into an RDD. And the second argument is the schema, a struct type of struct fields. That's how you define a schema in Spark. And that's how we create our data frame. So I feel like I did a pretty bad job explaining this last part. I tried. I will try to dig into all those concepts in more detail in future videos. Anyways, I hope you all found this video helpful. We talked about how to create data frames, how to add columns to a data frame, how to filter rows from a data frame, and it's kind of got our feet wet with schemas a bit. So if you found this useful, let me know in the comments or click the like button, and I will make more videos. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.